When he first heard his own voice on the radio, he didn't believe it was him. It was an ordinary day in the life of Jimmy, an average guy living his everyday life. That is until he heard what seemed to be his own voice coming from the radio. But there was something strange about it. The voice sounded exactly like him, but it wasn't him. Who could it possibly be? And why did he sound so similar? What was going on? He turned up the volume, trying to make out what the man was saying, hoping against hope that he would recognize who it was. But the more he listened, the more confused he became. The voice was undeniably his, but it was coming from someone else. Who was this person, and how could he sound so much like him? As the mystery deepened, Jimmy found himself drawn into a web of intrigue and suspense. He had to get to the bottom of this, but where to start? He racked his brain, trying to think of anyone who could sound so similar to him, but came up empty. It was driving him crazy. Then suddenly, it hit him like a bolt of lightning. Could it really be him? He quickly grabbed the phone and dialed the number, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, he heard the voice on the other end of the line, and it was his. But how could this be possible? What was going on here? He had never heard his own voice like this before. So how did the voice end up on the radio? Who was responsible for this? And why were they using his voice without his permission? These questions swirled around his head, but he couldn't bring himself to ask him yet. Something about the situation just didn't sit right with him. There was something deeper at play here. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but he was determined to find out what it was. He took a deep breath and decided to trust his gut. He pressed the phone to his ear and waited for the other voice to speak. As the conversation continued, Jimmy began to piece together the puzzle. He realized that the voice on the radio wasn't just his. It was a part of him, a part he had never known existed. But how could this be possible? How could someone else be using his voice and he not even know it? This was a mystery that had been hidden from him for years, but now that he knew it existed, he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. With renewed determination, Jimmy pressed on, eager to discover the secrets of the voice that had been haunting him. But as he delved deeper into the mystery, he soon realized that what he was dealing with was far more complex than he had ever imagined. The voice on the radio was just the tip of the iceberg, and as he uncovered more about it, he discovered a whole new world that he had never known existed. A world filled with secrets, lies, and danger. A world that threatened to consume it. But despite the danger, Jimmy was determined to see it through. He had come too far to turn back now. But who was behind the voice on the radio? Was it a friend, a foe, or something in between? Jimmy had no idea. The truth was, he had no idea what he was getting himself into. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. The voice on the radio was just a beginning. And as the story unfolded, Jimmy found himself caught in a web of deceit and betrayal that he could never have anticipated. He had to use all his wit and cunning to stay one step ahead of those who wanted him silenced, all while trying to uncover the truth of his own existence. It was a dangerous game, but Jimmy was a skilled player, and he wasn't about to go down without a fight. The mystery deepens as the days went by. Jimmy couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, just a figment of his imagination. But the more he tried to ignore it, the more it grew. Then one day, while browsing through the local newspaper, he saw it. The voice he had heard on the radio was now a face staring back at him from the pages of the news. It was a picture of a popular radio host, a man whose voice had become a household name. But there was something strange about the picture that caught Jimmy's attention. The man in the photograph looked exactly like him, but how could this be possible? Had he been living under a false identity all these years? Was this man really his twin who had stolen his life? Jimmy felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the image. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could there be another person out there who looked exactly like him? Had he been living a double life without even knowing it? He needed answers. But who could provide them? He thought back to the last time he had heard the voice on the radio and realized that there might be a way to find out the truth. He had recorded the broadcast and had it on his answering machine, but unfortunately, the tape had begun to deteriorate and the voice was too faint to make out what was being said. He needed to find a way to improve the audio quality, but he didn't know where to turn. That's when he remembered an old friend of his, a former electronics expert who had a knack for working with audio equipment. He dialed the number, hoping that his friend would be able to help. When his friend picked up the phone, Jimmy explained the situation and asked if he could take a look at the tape. His friend agreed, and Jimmy brought the tape over as soon as possible. As soon as his friend listened to the recording, his eyes widened in surprise. "I can't believe this!" he exclaimed. "This is unbelievable!" He explained that he had worked with audio equipment for years and had never heard anything like this before. The voice on the tape was unlike any other he had ever heard. And when he looked at the waveform, it was clear that this was no ordinary recording. It was then that Jimmy's friend had an idea. He had an old audio enhancement device that was used for making recordings from vinyl records. It wasn't very good, but it might be enough to improve the audio quality of the tape and make out what was being said. He hooked up the device and played the tape. Suddenly, the voice on the radio was clear as day. Jimmy and his friend listened intently as the voice spoke. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. It was Jimmy's voice, but it wasn't his. Who was the man using his voice? As the investigation progressed, Jimmy discovered that the man using his voice was a well-known radio host. But there was more to the story than met the eye. The radio host was using Jimmy's voice for nefarious purposes, and Jimmy had to uncover the truth. But who was the radio host, and why was he using Jimmy's voice? Jimmy delved deeper into the mystery, determined to uncover the truth. He discovered that the radio host was a charismatic and popular figure in the community, known for his smooth voice and engaging personality. But beneath the surface, he was a master manipulator who used his fame and influence for personal gain. He had a secret past that he kept hidden from everyone, including his closest friends and family. And now he was using Jimmy's voice to further his own agenda. Jimmy couldn't believe what he was learning about the radio host. He had always seemed like such a nice guy, always had a kind word for everyone, and always willing to lend a helping hand. But now it seemed that everything he had ever said or done had been a lie. And the more Jimmy learned about the radio host, the more he realized that he was in danger. The radio host was a dangerous man who would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. And now that Jimmy had stumbled upon him, he was in his crosshairs. Jimmy knew that he had to be careful. He couldn't afford to make a single mistake. If the radio host found out that he was onto him, he would be in serious trouble. But Jimmy was determined to uncover the truth no matter what. He had come too far to turn back now. With renewed determination, Jimmy pressed on, eager to discover the secrets that the radio host was hiding. But as he delved deeper into the mystery, he soon realized that what he was dealing with was far more complex than he had ever imagined. The radio host was just the tip of the iceberg, and as he uncovered more about him, he discovered a whole new world that he had never known existed. A world filled with secrets, lies, and danger. A world that threatened to consume him. But despite the danger, Jimmy was determined to see it through. He had come too far to turn back now. But who was the radio host, and why was he using Jimmy's voice? What secrets was he hiding? And how could Jimmy expose them? The story takes a thrilling turn as Jimmy finds himself in a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the radio host. As he closes in on the truth, he must use all his wit and cunning to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. The stakes are high and the danger is real. Will Jimmy be able to uncover the truth, or will he become another victim of the radio host's sinister scheme? Find out in the next episode.